Escape your routine for a while and still feel heavy inside. This weight does not come from what you do, but from what you carry without speaking. The thoughts you never finish. The emotions you never name. The memories you quietly push aside because there never seems to be the right moment to face them. Carl Jung believed that what drains us most is not external struggle, but internal resistance. The effort it takes to suppress parts of ourselves. The energy spent pretending that certain wounds no longer hurt, that certain questions no longer matter. Over time, this inner tension accumulates, and we begin to feel tired without understanding why. From a young age, we learn that silence is safer than truth. We learn to hide disappointment to avoid conflict, to hide fear to appear strong, to hide longing to appear satisfied. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, we begin to store pieces of ourselves in the dark corners of the psyche. Not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient. Yet nothing disappears simply because we refuse to look at it. What we repress does not vanish. It waits. And while it waits, it weighs on us. It shows up as anxiety without a clear cause, as irritation over small things, as a sense that life is happening somewhere else, just out of reach. This is the weight we carry in silence, the unlived life within us. Jung warned that when the inner world is ignored, it does not remain quiet. It speaks through the body, through dreams, through sudden emotional reactions that seem out of proportion. The psyche seeks balance, and if consciousness refuses to listen, the unconscious will find another way to be heard. Many people believe strength means endurance, carrying everything without complaint. But true strength, Jung suggested, lies in consciousness, in the willingness to turn inward and acknowledge what has been buried, not to judge it, not to fix it immediately, but simply to see it. Because the moment something is named, it begins to lose its power. Silence becomes dangerous when it is used to escape ourselves. When we silence grief instead of grieving. When we silence anger instead of understanding it. When we silence desire until we no longer know what we want. This kind of silence does not bring peace. It creates fragmentation. And fragmentation is exhausting. The path toward wholeness does not begin with dramatic change. It begins with a quiet act of honesty. A moment when you admit, even only to yourself, that something inside you has been asking for attention. That the heaviness you feel is not a flaw, but a signal. A signal that something true wants to return. When you allow yourself to notice what you have been carrying, the weight does not disappear instantly. But it shifts. It becomes meaningful. And meaning, Jung believed, is what transforms suffering into growth. So if you feel tired in a way that rest cannot heal, do not rush to escape it. Pause. Listen. Ask yourself not what is wrong with you, but what within you has been waiting too long to be heard. Because the moment you stop carrying it in silence, you begin carrying it with awareness. And that is where transformation quietly begins. Letting go is often misunderstood as weakness, as giving up, as losing something important. But in truth, letting go is one of the most courageous acts a person can perform. It is not the act of dropping what matters. It is the act of releasing what no longer belongs to who you are becoming. Most of us hold on far longer than we should. We cling to old identities, expired relationships, outdated beliefs, and versions of ourselves that once served a purpose but now quietly drain us. We tell ourselves that holding on is loyalty, or discipline, or responsibility. Yet beneath that story is often fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of emptiness, fear of who we might be without the familiar weight. Carl Jung believed that psychological growth demands sacrifice, not of what is essential, but of what is false. The ego resists this deeply. It prefers the known pain to the unknown possibility. Even suffering can feel safer than change when suffering is predictable. This is why letting go feels like standing at the edge of something vast. There is no guarantee on the other side. No applause. No certainty. Only the quiet sense that something inside you has reached its limit. We are rarely taught how to release with grace. Instead, we are taught endurance. To push through. To adapt endlessly. To become smaller if necessary. Over time, this creates a life built more on survival than truth. And the cost of that survival is the slow disappearance of the self. Letting go does not mean erasing the past. It means loosening its grip. It means acknowledging that what once protected you may now be confining you. A belief that kept you safe as a child may keep you fearful as an adult. A role that earned you approval may now prevent intimacy. A dream that once inspired you may now feel hollow. The courage to let go is the courage to disappoint expectations, both others and your own. It is the courage to stop proving and start listening. To admit, quietly, that something no longer fits. Jung wrote that we do not solve our problems by force, but by outgrowing them. And growth requires space. Space cannot exist where everything is tightly held. Letting go often begins in silence. Not with dramatic endings, but with subtle shifts. Saying no where you once said yes. Allowing rest where you once demanded effort. Releasing the need to explain yourself to those who cannot hear you. At first, this feels uncomfortable. The old patterns protest. The mind warns of loss. But slowly, something else emerges. A lightness, not of ease, but of alignment. You begin to feel less divided inside. Less at war with yourself. What you release creates room for something truer to arrive. Letting go is not about becoming less. It is about becoming more honest. More whole. More aligned with a life that is quietly trying to unfold through you. And when you finally loosen your grip on what no longer serves you, you may discover that what remains was never meant to be carried in the first place. There are moments in life when no advice helps. When motivation feels hollow, reassurance feels distant, and action feels forced. In those moments, what we need is not another answer, but the right question. A question that does not demand immediate clarity, but invites honesty. A question that turns us inward and quietly awakens the self. Carl Jung believed that the most important questions are not meant to be solved quickly. They are meant to be lived. They work slowly, reshaping us from the inside as we carry them through our days. Unlike answers, which often close a door, a true question opens one. The question that awakens the self is simple, yet unsettling. What part of me have I been neglecting? This question bypasses surface-level explanations. It does not ask what you should do next or how to fix your life. It asks where you have been absent from yourself. And when asked sincerely, it often reveals a quiet truth you have been avoiding, not out of ignorance, but out of self-protection. We neglect parts of ourselves in subtle ways. We ignore fatigue and call it discipline. We ignore sadness and call it strength. We ignore desire and call it maturity. Over time, these neglected parts retreat into the unconscious, where they do not disappear, but wait. And waiting, they shape our moods, our choices, our sense of meaning. Jung taught that the unconscious is not an enemy. It is a messenger. When we fail to listen, it speaks through discomfort, confusion, or restlessness. These are not signs that something is wrong with us. They are signs that something within us wants recognition. Another question follows naturally. Who am I becoming by continuing this way? This question brings the future into the present. It reveals the direction your habits are carrying you, not in theory, but in reality. Often, the answer is not dramatic. It is quiet, even disappointing. And yet, within that disappointment lies the seed of change. To ask such questions requires courage, because the answers may challenge the identity you have built. They may expose how much of your life is shaped by expectation rather than intention. How often you choose what is familiar over what is true. But awakening the self does not require immediate transformation. It requires presence. The willingness to stay with the question instead of rushing to escape it. To let it disturb you gently, the way growth always does. Jung believed that consciousness expands not through certainty, but through tension. Through holding opposing truths without forcing resolution. The question that awakens the self creates this tension. It pulls you between who you are and who you might become. And in that space, something begins to shift. You may not change your life overnight, but you may begin to listen differently. To notice when you are betraying yourself. To recognize when a choice brings contraction rather than expansion. A single honest question, asked at the right moment, can become a compass. Not pointing toward easy answers, but toward a truer way of being. And when you allow that question to stay with you, you may find that the self you have been searching for was never lost, only waiting to be invited back into awareness. This adaptation hardens into identity. The false persona is born not from deception, but from survival. Yet living too long behind this mask comes at a cost. When you consistently present a version of yourself that is not fully true, the psyche splits. One part performs. Another part watches in silence. And that silent part does not disappear. It becomes the shadowed self, carrying unmet needs, unexpressed emotions, and unlived desires. This is why many people feel strangely empty even when life appears successful. The career is stable. The relationships look fine. The routine works. And yet, something feels off. Jung believed this emptiness is not a failure, but a signal. A message from the deeper self saying, "This is not all that I am." The false persona thrives on approval. It learns how to be liked, praised, and trusted. But approval is not the same as connection. When people love the mask, they never truly meet the person behind it. And this creates a painful paradox, being accepted, yet unseen. Over time, maintaining the persona becomes exhausting. You monitor your words. You suppress reactions. You perform emotional labor that no one notices. And because the persona is rewarded, you feel guilty questioning it. You tell yourself you should be grateful. That others have it worse. That this is just how life is. But the psyche does not accept that bargain forever. Jung observed that when the true self is ignored for too long, it pushes back, through anxiety, depression, irritability, or sudden life crisis. These moments are often misunderstood as breakdowns, when in fact they are breakthroughs trying to happen. Releasing the false persona does not mean abandoning responsibility or becoming reckless. It means reclaiming choice. Choosing when to adapt and when to be honest. When to perform and when to rest. When to be agreeable and when to be real. This release begins quietly. In small acts of truth. Admitting when you are tired. Saying no without apology. Allowing yourself to be misunderstood rather than betraying yourself. Jung wrote that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires withdrawing projections and facing who we actually are. And that journey begins the moment you ask, "Who am I when no one is watching?" When you loosen your grip on the false persona, you do not lose yourself. You find yourself. And what remains, though less polished, is infinitely more alive. Many people move through life without realizing they are wearing a mask. Not a physical one, but a psychological one, carefully shaped by expectations, approval, and fear of rejection. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, the version of ourselves we present to the world so we can belong. At first, the mask feels protective. It helps us adapt. It teaches us how to behave, how to be liked, how to avoid conflict. As children, we quickly learn which traits are rewarded and which are discouraged. We learn to smile when we are praised, to hide when we are scolded, to become what feels safest. Over time, this adaptation becomes automatic. The problem begins when the mask is worn for so long that we forget it is a mask. Living behind the mask means your outer life may look stable, while your inner life slowly fades. You say the right things, meet expectations, and play your role well, yet something inside feels muted. Your emotions are filtered. Your desires are postponed. Your truth is negotiated away in small, seemingly harmless moments. Jung believed that what we hide does not disappear. It retreats into the unconscious. The parts of you that were inconvenient, emotional, uncertain, or too intense become buried. They form what he called the shadow. And the longer you live behind the mask, the heavier that shadow becomes. This is why exhaustion often appears without a clear cause. You are not tired because life is demanding. You are tired because you are divided. One part of you performs, while another part waits silently to be acknowledged. This inner split drains energy in a way sleep cannot repair. The mask is often praised. You are seen as reliable, easygoing, successful, or strong. But praise for the mask can feel strangely hollow. People respond to who they think you are, not who you actually are. This creates a quiet loneliness, being surrounded yet unseen. Living behind the mask also distorts self-perception. You begin to confuse others' expectations with your own desires. You forget what you genuinely enjoy and remember only what you are supposed to want. Your life becomes organized around fitting in rather than feeling alive. Jung noted that many psychological crises occur when the persona collapses. This often happens in adulthood, when the roles that once worked no longer satisfy the deeper self. These moments are frightening, but they are not failures. They are invitations to step closer to authenticity. Stepping out from behind the mask does not require dramatic rebellion. It begins with honesty in small, quiet ways. Letting your face rest when you are tired. Speaking your truth without over-explaining. Allowing silence instead of filling space with performance. When you begin to live with less masking, some people may drift away. They were attached to the role, not the person. But those who remain will meet you more fully. And more importantly, you will finally meet yourself. Jung believed wholeness comes not from perfection, but from integration. When you no longer live behind the mask, life becomes less polished, but far more real. There are moments in life when everything appears to unravel at once. Motivation fades. Certainty dissolves. The roles that once defined you no longer fit. From the outside, it may look like failure, burnout, or loss of direction. But Carl Jung saw these moments differently. He believed that many crises are not signs of breakdown, but signals of return. A crisis often emerges when the life you are living no longer matches the person you are becoming. For years, you may have functioned well by following expectations, building a career, maintaining relationships, fulfilling responsibilities. The persona carried you forward. It did what was required. But beneath the surface, the neglected parts of the self were watching, waiting, and eventually, they demand to be heard. Jung described this as the unconscious rising to consciousness. When the true self has been ignored for too long, it does not whisper anymore, it interrupts. Through anxiety, emptiness, irritability, depression, or a sudden loss of meaning, the psyche forces a pause. Not to punish you, but to redirect you. This is why crises feel so disorienting. The old structures no longer work, yet the new ones have not appeared. You stand in a psychological in-between space, unsure of who you are without the identities you once relied on. The mind searches for quick solutions, but the soul asks for something deeper: honesty. A Jungian crisis is rarely about external circumstances alone. Two people can face the same loss, the same failure, the same change, and only one collapses inward. The difference lies in what that event touches inside. A crisis exposes the gap between the life you constructed and the life that wants to emerge. Many people try to escape this discomfort. They numb it, distract themselves, rush to fix it. But Jung warned that avoiding the crisis only delays it. What is not faced consciously will return in another form, often stronger and more painful. The purpose of the crisis is not to destroy your life, but to dismantle what is false. It strips away illusions about who you thought you were, what you believed would make you whole, and how much of yourself you were willing to sacrifice to belong. In this sense, the crisis is an initiation. This is why growth during these periods feels slow and lonely. There is no clear map, no applause. Much of the work happens quietly, inwardly, where no one else can see it. You begin questioning your values. You notice what drains you and what brings relief. You sense that something old is ending, even if you cannot yet name what is beginning. Jung believed that meaning is not found by avoiding suffering, but by understanding it. When you stay with the crisis instead of fleeing it, it begins to transform. Confusion becomes clarity. Pain becomes insight. Fear becomes a guide. The crisis calls you back, not to who you used to be, but to who you were before you learned to abandon yourself. And when you answer that call, life does not become easier, but it becomes truer. And that truth, Jung believed, is what heals the soul. In the noise of life, it's easy to forget who we truly are. We accumulate roles, habits, and expectations so gradually that one day we wake up and realize we no longer recognize ourselves. The world has a way of shaping us, and sometimes, in trying to belong, we lose sight of the center of our being. Carl Jung called this center the true self, the part of us untouched by masks, fear, or judgment. Returning to it is not a dramatic transformation, but a gentle, courageous act of remembering. The journey back begins with awareness. Often, we think we know ourselves, but what we see is a reflection shaped by years of conditioning. The persona, the fear of judgment, and the pull of old complexes obscure the self beneath layers of expectation. Jung believed that the first step to reclaiming authenticity is to recognize these layers without blame. By observing where we act out of obligation rather than desire, where we hide from criticism instead of expressing truth, we begin to discern the patterns that are not ours. Letting go is central to this process. The true self cannot flourish while burdened by outdated beliefs, unhealed wounds, or the need for approval. We release the persona by allowing small acts of honesty. Admitting fatigue instead of saying we're fine, voicing a preference instead of always agreeing, acknowledging a mistake instead of hiding it. Each of these acts is a silent reclaiming of autonomy. We release the fear of judgment by daring to be imperfect, seeing that the world does not collapse when we step out of the script. Relationships, too, act as mirrors. Jung emphasized that the people who trigger discomfort often reflect parts of ourselves we have neglected or rejected. By noticing our reactions, irritation, envy, anxiety, we can trace them back to the shadow within. Returning to the true self means learning which relationships nourish growth and which activate unresolved pain. It's not about cutting people off, but about creating space to align with our deepest values. Another essential aspect is disentangling from the past. Many of our limitations are not inherent. They are old complexes masquerading as identity. By seeing these patterns for what they are, we create distance and reclaim the freedom to act from the present moment. This is where the self begins to reemerge, no longer constrained by fear, comparison, or old narratives. Returning to the true self is a quiet revolution. It doesn't require upheaval, only presence, courage, and patience. It is in the daily choices, the small moments of honesty, surrender, and reflection, that we rediscover who we were before the world asked us to conform. Jung believed that when we reclaim this self, life becomes more aligned, more meaningful, and more free, not because the world changes, but because we step fully into the person we were always meant to be. The journey back to the true self is lifelong, but each step is profound. It is a return to clarity, authenticity, and the quiet, enduring voice within that has always known the way.